How did bad economics destroy Venezuela? Venezuela is a country that has experienced a dramatic rise and fall in economic prosperity over the last century. Once one of the most richest countries in South America, the country has experienced hyperinflation, shortage of basic goods, and widespread poverty in recent years. In this video, we'll explore the history of Venezuela's economy, from its rise to prosperity to its current state of crisis. Venezuela was colonized by Spain in the 16th century and gained independence in 1811. The country's economy was initially based on agriculture, but this began to change in the early 20th century with the discovery of oil. In 1922, the first oil well was drilled in Venezuela, and the country soon became one of the world's leading oil producers. Venezuela's economy became heavily reliant on oil production and exports, and the consequences of this reliance became clear in the 1970s when global oil prices declined and crash of commodity prices. Venezuela's currency, the bolivar, has been closely tied to the country's oil industry since the early 20th century. As oil exports became the main source of revenue for the government, the bolivar became increasingly dependent on oil prices. This meant that fluctuations in the price of oil had a significant impact on the value of bolivar. This can be explained by the economic law of terms of trade effect. The law describes the relationship between a country's currency and its exports. When a country's exports are primarily composed of commodities such as oil, the terms of trade effect can come into play. The terms of trade effect refers to the impact of changes in the price of a country's exports on its trade balance. When the price of a country's exports, such as oil, increases, the country will earn more revenue, which will cause its currency to appreciate. However, the appreciation of the currency can make exports less competitive, leading to a decline in their sales. When oil prices were high, the bolivar was strong, and when prices were low, the bolivar weakened. The fluctuations of the value of bolivar will enhance the fluctuations in prices of imports and exports. Increase in oil prices meant an increase in value of the bolivar, and thus making imports more cheaper compared to exports. The affordability of the cheap imports therefore led to dumping of cheap goods and services in the country, thus killing local industries. Reduction in oil prices meant decline in value of bolivar, making imports more expensive, and as a country that mostly relied mainly on importing imports, meant affording less and less exports, in turn deeply affect citizens of the country. This dependence on oil exports has also led to the government using oil revenues to fund social programs and infrastructure projects, rather than investing in diversifying the economy. This meant that when oil prices fell, the government was unable to generate enough revenue to support these programs, leading to the decline in value of bolivar and inaffordability of imports, thus greatly deteriorating the rights of Venezuelans. As oil production increased, Venezuela became heavily reliant on oil exports, which accounted for more than 90% of the total exports by the 1970s. This meant that the country's economy was more vulnerable to fluctuations in the global oil market. When oil prices were high, the government was able to generate significant revenue, which it used to fund imports of consumer goods and other products. However, when oil prices fell, the government was unable to generate enough revenue to continue importing goods at the same level, leading to shortages of basic goods like food and medicine. Furthermore, the government's focus on oil exports and its failure to diversify the economy meant that Venezuela was not able to develop other industries that could support its economy. This made the country overly dependent on imports of many basic goods, such as food and medicine, which it was unable to produce domestically. In recent years, the decline in oil production and revenues has further exacerbated the country's economic crisis, leading to hyperinflation, shortages of basic goods, and widespread poverty. Despite this, the country continued to depend on oil revenues, which led to both benefits and drawbacks. On the one hand, the government was unable to invest in social programs and infrastructure. On the other hand, it failed to diversify the economy, which left the country vulnerable to changes in the oil market. In 1998, Hugo Chavez was elected president on a populist platform that promised to address widespread poverty and inequality. While his early policies were popular, including investment in social programs and nationalization of key industries, they also led to economic mismanagement, corruption, and political polarization. Under Chavez, his successor Nicolas Maduro, the government nationalized much of the economy, including the oil industry, and expanded social programs. However, these policies were often accompanied by authoritarianism, corruption, and a lack of investment in infrastructure and diversification of the economy. The government's response to economic problems has often been to print more money, leading to even higher inflation rates and a deepening economic crisis. The country's inflation rate skyrocketed and basic goods like food, medicine, and toiletries have become scarce. The unemployment rate has also risen and many Venezuelans are struggling to make ends meet. In addition to the government's economic mismanagement, the United States and other countries have imposed economic sanctions on Venezuela in response to human rights abuses and political repression. These sanctions have further exacerbated the country's economic crisis. Venezuela's decline from a rich country to a poor country has been driven by a combination of factors, including declining oil prices, political instability, economic mismanagement, corruption, and lack of investment in infrastructure and diversification of the economy. While there transparency and accountability in government and an end to political polarization will be the most important steps in the right direction. It is important to note that the situation in Venezuela is so complex and multifaceted, and any attempts to understand or address the country's economic crisis must take into account its historical and political context. By learning from Venezuela's mistakes, we can work to build more stable, sustainable, and equitable economies in the future. Thank you for watching and make sure you subscribe to the channel.